Recording then, see. Got it. On and going. Good morning, good afternoon, good part of the day, everyone. Thank you for joining the largest, fastest growing, and the most active global, at this point, large-scale Scrum community. Today we have a very special guest, my good friend and colleague, MJ Michael James from Seattle. I will go by my memory and introduce him. He is one of the very first few certified Scrum trainers. He was made or deputized into this with this credential by Ken Schwaber himself. Ken Schwaber is the co-creator of Scrum. MJ has a very wide, very rich industry experience as a product developer, as a Scrum Master, as a product owner. He has done lots of engineering on his own using TDD, refactoring, continuous integration, pair programming. And his experience goes way back when into late 70s. He also has traveled the world. I believe he lived in Japan, and he has a lot of personal firsthand knowledge of the Japanese culture. And he is the author of the artifact that hundreds of thousands of people around the globe have used. Many of my clients and friends and colleagues have referred to this artifact. It's called the Scrum Master Checklist. It has been translated to many languages. So MJ is the sole proprietor, the creator of the artifact. And I often say that if you really want the how-to extension to the Scrum guide, have the Scrum Master Checklist handy, because this is a very good extension to what you will learn from the SG. So today, MJ will talk about it and the history, and also will allude to some other experiences and things that he thinks are relevant, including expansion of Scrum, scaling, agility, scaling Scrum, and how the Scrum Master Checklist still applies today and how important this is. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it on to you, MJ. Thank you very much for coming out and doing this for us.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Gene, for I've been impressed with what you've been able to do with this this meetup group. Appreciate the community that you've been able to create. And I recognize some people here, so hello to everyone that I know here. Do you have specific things, or should I give some? I can start with the story of this that people are
Yeah,
usually curious about.
the floor is yours, literally.
Yeah.
You'll definitely have carte blanche.
All right. Well, I'll try not to ramble, and then maybe we can open up some Q&A later on. I will the background of this. First of all, I'm gonna before I even show the checklist itself, I'll tell a story about a session that we ran in I think it was in Sweden. Anyway, where we talked about an example of Scrum Master coordinating between teams and solving the team's problems and being a go-between between the teams and the customer, and asked people what they thought about this. And these were experienced Scrum people. And they all said, "Oh yeah, that's great. That's what should be happening." And my heart sank a bit because this is not the way that Ken Schwaber, anyway, or the way that I envisioned the Scrum role, or the Scrum Master role specifically. We do not want to. Actually, I'll take our friend Ram. I think is the first person to say this. If you're doing the same thing you were doing 3 months ago as the Scrum Master, you something has gone wrong somewhere. Possibly what you've done, and instead of creating a self-managing team and reducing the distance between the people doing the work, who we'll call developers for now, and the people consuming the work, or the Gemba value consumption, we've inserted ourselves in between them and created a dependence on us. And that's not what we're there for. We're there to bring the organization to a higher level. We're there to create. So we're meant to be on the meta level in this picture here. We're not on the same clock as everyone else. And if we were, and let's say the organization also has management, if the scrum masters and the management were to not be there for a few days, if we're doing this, if we got this set up right, perhaps no one would even notice because everyone should know how to do their jobs. Uh, and this also leads to some misconceptions about the product owner role, which are made a seem to be one of the most common dysfunctions in Scrum. It was bothering me so much I made the first comic book about that, and some of you've seen this comic book. If not, then uh, I'll send you the link to it. This has also been translated into a bunch of languages. So if a self-managing and truly cross-functional team is empowered, then our job is on a different plane, as I say here. We're not coordinators, but we are there to teach, and we are there to increase the capabilities of the organization. So that's a starting point, and that's probably different than a lot of people are interpreting the Scrum Master role. And I know a lot of people have had a bad experience with Scrum, and I think it comes down to these, ultimately to the roles. I was at a years and years ago when you could still get access to Kent Beck. I was at a Agile Open Northwest session, I think, where someone asked him a question, and I forget the question, but his answer made an impression on me. He says, "Let's. We always put uh, principles over processes. So go always return back to principles. And of course, uh, in it's a wise thing in the current Scrum Guide for all its flaws. It puts the people before the processes, just like the Agile Manifesto it does. So if we get clarity about the roles, then the other stuff should kind of fall into place. And if you have, by the way, if you've got questions about this or challenges with this, maybe take notes of them, and then we have some time later, we might be able to talk about them a bit. So that's where I'm starting from with this. Now we'll give the background of the how this came to be. At the time, I've been working with a client in California. We weren't allowed to say it back then, but I think it's okay now. It was the Apple online store, and I had been there for weeks down in Cupertino. And this was a place that had scaled up, which, by the way, is usually a mistake, increasing the number of people. The idea that adding people will linearly increase the output is a bit of a misconception. But they did have this curse of too much money to spend. And so they had something that had been working pretty well before, and then they threw money at it, and they went into this world where it was just full of new hires and new project managers and all these people running around. And as a naive coach in those days, I didn't fully recognize what the root problem was or what to do about it. But I did notice a lot of problems there, and did the best I could with them. That's also an interesting story. But after I had been working with them and I had come back home, and seeing all these problems, one of their Scrum Masters wrote to me and asked, "Oh, well, what am I supposed to do? Like I was a project manager before, and I used to do this, 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 and this, and you're saying that these things either go away or are reallocated, usually to developers in Scrum or to teams in Scrum. So what am I supposed to do?" So all I did, and this was not a lot of time I spent, I just typed out the problems I had seen in that particular organization. So I just wrote out a list of things in the same categories that I had learned from Ken. Things about the product owner, things about the team, things about the outer organization itself, and things that I had observed myself as a developer, having done Scrum and seeing a huge discrepancy between people trying to do Scrum without changing any of their technical practices. So I added a section to say, if these things aren't happening, you may not be technical yourself, but you ought to be able to recognize whether or not test-driven development is happening, whether there's constant, merciless refactoring of the code, whether there's this. I like the idea of a push to test button. I have an aerospace background, and so we did something in our devices boxes that would go onto airplanes. Would a lot of times have a built-in test, a requirement for built-in test. So you push a button, then it comes back, gives a light indicating that the unit is still good, or no, we need to swap out this unit, replace it with another one. So that was a capability that was already, it's kind of intuitive to me, and I was surprised when I got into commercial software that most commercial software didn't have tests, didn't have the rigorous automated tests that we needed in the aerospace world. So I also added a section that wasn't explicitly written in Scrum. Now, people argue about this because every time I heard Ken Schwaber talk about this, he emphasized the importance of this. He just didn't want to go so far as Ron Jeffries and others did or Kent Beck and others did in extreme programming and specify exactly what technical practices. He thought that would be overly prescriptive. So he didn't do that. But that doesn't mean that he didn't place value on these things. They were crucial to him. So that's the backstory. I just made a list of things for one organization. It was not meant to be a general kind of prescription for everyone. This is why I gave it the title example. An example checklist. The idea was that other Scrum Masters in their own context or other teams and Scrum Masters would come up with what things would be on their list. But here is at least to me a kind of baseline. And also this was partly a response to people saying, yeah, well, I've done everything and I've done everything I can do. And so there's a challenge at the end of this, some of you have seen. It says, if you can check off these items and still have time left, then talk to me. Tell me what you did. What's your secret? Because I haven't been able to do that. I've never been to never seen any place where they could put smiley faces on, all of these check boxes. So I suggest, if you can't, your job is not done yet. Now, what does that mean? And now I'm going to add a distinction or the way of expressing it. I learned from Bas Vodde, one of the creators of large-scale Scrum. And all these things are the Scrum Master's problems. So if these, if you don't have a great big green check mark on each of these items, that is definitely the Scrum Master's problem. But that's different than saying this is the Scrum Master's problem to solve. And I hope you see the distinction. We can talk a bit about some of the tools that the Scrum Master has. One of the tools the Scrum Master has is let's call it actively doing nothing. Actively doing nothing. And if any of you, maybe you're familiar, you've seen Woody Zuhl's video about mob programming, the old one. You see him, you see the team is mob programming, they're all doing all this stuff. Woody himself, as the coach or manager, is doing this as well. He's mostly, you see him, he's observing for the most part. And this is the hardest thing. And now that I'm a dad, know even more about how hard it is to not intervene. I'm going to suggest we have a tendency, a neurotic tendency to intervene and prevent the learning of a lesson. One of our tools then is silence. Actively doing nothing. Doesn't mean we're absent. It means that we're just quietly observing. And if we're using that tool most of the time, then or if we can use that tool most of the time, that doesn't mean it's the only thing we do. I don't want to suggest that. but consider adding a bit more of that. Some of you are in this role now, or probably a lot of people I talk to are been told to be in this role, but they're given contradictory responsibilities by the organization, which is another one of these role confusion problems. And I think it's difficult to solve these problems without um, top-down and bottom-up engagement in the organization. In many cases, this confusion about the roles. Say, well, you sent me to a CSM class, and you gave me a job title where my survival depends on doing things that contradict what they told me to do in the class. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry that that happened, and I don't know if specifically what to do in everyone's case, but suggest that um, there is confusion about the roles that it permeates multiple layers of the organization. Now that's well, you. Sorry if I'd ramble a little bit. There is an example that people say, well, that's not possible. And then they talk about the real world. Now, I understand this is your real world, and that's the real world of millions of people. I do want you to also know that there is another real world that millions of people aren't experiencing, but thousands of people are. And that is the world of where teams are nearly entirely self-managing, truly self-managing, self-organizing teams. Uh, Now, I experienced this firsthand in our own company. Uh, this has to do now in our tiny company where you have just about a dozen people. Uh, if everyone's paying attention to this, the team over time um, progresses to the level where you can trust them with more responsibilities. So I don't think this happens instantly overnight. I think that this is a movement that happens over time. The team demonstrates its capacity for self-management, self-organization, and management gives them more uh, liberty, gives them more responsibilities. Remember, every time you give responsibilities to a named role, you're taking responsibilities away from the team, which is why there are only 3 roles in Scrum. And so we would eventually evolve to the point where, and in my own experience, and sorry if some of you heard these stories before, but the team was actually given hiring responsibilities. Now, technically, and also firing responsibilities that they exercised in one case. Now, technically, the owner of the company had the legal responsibility in that matter, the legal responsibility for the decision. But our we know that it's possible for a team to evolve to grow to the level where they can manage each other effectively, which is not unmanaged. So to be clear about this, a self-managing team is not an unmanaged team. It's a self-management occurs. And, my back when I was a directly managed employee, I can imagine my boss could sit on my desk all day and still not really know how I was doing that day. But when I'm on a team and we're collaborating intensely, they know, whether I'm having a good day or whether I'm stuck or etc. So we do find that if people are willing to open up to this, and team self-management is something that can work. Some of this may have to do with how the team members, whether they've selected each other or whether they've been assigned to work together, which isn't always the best thing to do. As you may know, in LESS, we do something called a team self-design workshop, which is it seems to enhance the chemistry of the team. So yeah, this was meant to be. I forgot where I was going with this. This was just meant to be one example of some of the things that a Scrum Master would be concerned with. Oh, we were talking about the Scrum Master toolkit. Other things in the Scrum Master toolkit. So what are the tools that we use? And this is not written here. Maybe I should have added this, but I like to keep this short, so it's always a trade-off. Some of the other tools in the Scrum Master's toolkit. So remember the first one? The one, at least the one I put first, is actively doing nothing. Observing, learning, and is trying to suppress the urge to intervene, allowing the team. There's always a trade-off between expediency and the longer term growth, and we have to consider those things. Uh, but think about, but usually I'm going to suggest in organizations, the problem isn't excess focus on long term growth. The focus isn't excess attention to learning. That's not the problem they have. They have people who go out with, try to cut down trees with unsharpened tools. And they're many times the short term mentality. And so in most cases, it's we want to try to present a counterbalance to that short termism. Think about the long term growth of the team as a self-managing entity, and eventually the organization as in its teams of teams, as being things where they can manage each other's, or the teams are effectively collaborating towards the shared goal. And this seems to be a harder thing to set up because of sometimes the amount of contact they have or the geographic distribution and all that. So that's another level of of self-management beyond just what the team does. But since then, so I'll go back to our story. Uh, other people found this useful and wound up. I put it online. It's of the things I've written. It's not one of the things I put the most work into. It wasn't. It didn't take a lot of, unless you count the experience that went into it. But it didn't take long to write this. Other people found it useful. People wanted it in other languages, and now it's been translated into like Bosnian and uh, two different kinds of Chinese. We don't have a Braille version yet, but I suppose someone will do that eventually. So that's some background. I guess we should finish. So what are the tools? Other tools that we have, well, one of them is modeling behavior. I'm slightly changing what Buzz Vogel said. Uh, we can influence situations quite a bit simply with what we do. Uh, we start to do things without telling people to do things, but just doing things, and it establishes permission to start doing those things for other people. And many times subconsciously, people start to pick up just the way that we're being, which is the part that's difficult to teach in the CSM class, the way of being that comes with this. One of the changes that I made to this was when I discovered Marshall Rosenberg's work, the nonviolent communication, which is not, even he admitted this was not a good name for it. It is actually more, nonviolent isn't the main thing about it. The main thing about it is it's responsible communication. Originally, I was referencing a book called Crucial Conversations, which I still recommend as a good book, but I'm just going to suggest this NVC book is even more useful. Great bang for buck. If anyone is spending too much time, this is practically everyone, who's spending too much time arguing with their significant others, for instance, suggest this book. I mean, it will pay for itself in just the time spent reading, at least in my case. I spend much less time arguing with anyone after having read this. NVC is mostly about taking responsibility for our own feelings and being able to, and another skill useful for NVC is distinguishing observations from evaluations. Now, they're both useful things, observation and evaluation. But we need, it helps us, enhances us, our teamwork and our teams, our communications and our team's abilities. If we're clear about the distinction and we know when we're in one versus the other. And there are times when sticking to objective observations can sidestep a whole lot of unnecessary conflict. And that doesn't mean that all conflict is unnecessary, but it can help us focus on the ones that are important. Something else that uh, we usually talk about, it's not written in here explicitly, are the team dynamics. For example, the forming, storming, norming, performing model. Now, which has been abused quite a bit. So we want to be clear that this, it's, some models, all models are wrong, but some are useful. It's sometimes useful to recognize that a team has got to go through some conflict, or it may not be like conflict might not be the right word for it, but it's going to go through a growth process where where our non-intervention is especially important as a Scrum Master, where it's especially important to be patient and to observe and to step in with some of the other tools only when needed. Be judicious in when we use these interventions, which would lead to another tool in the Scrum Master toolbox, which is to ask questions. Ask questions, and many times the point of asking the question is not because we want the answer. Now, we might be curious ourselves. I'm talking about it from the Scrum Master perspective, but or perhaps management. Some of you are managers, but the point of asking the question is to provoke a conversation. Uh, it's just like on the old style pinball machines. You with the flippers, and you could, a skillful player can tilt the game a little bit, can bump it to affect what happens. If you bump it too much, the tilt light comes on. But I'm going to suggest as Scrum Masters, we're allowed to nudge. We're allowed to bump the system sometimes. Or to use Jerry Weinberg's analogy, the idea of the jiggler. We're there to shake a little bit, to shake the system and cause something different to happen. So asking questions is one of the ways that we can jiggle without stepping over the line into direct command management of the team or the developers. So asking questions is a powerful tool. We can also, coming back to the NVC stuff, we can make observations. We can make neutral observations. So neither good nor bad, but just make an observation. And we have to really look at ourselves to make sure that we're doing this. But we can, to say something. On Thursday, XYZ happened. There was the continuous integration server failed, or whatever it might be. And that might be enough. Yeah, sometimes you have to judge this depending on how far evolved the team is. That might be enough of a jiggle to get the system working so that the things on this list, or more of them, are that the ones that you're concerned about are being satisfied. Now, finally, in our toolbox, we do have interrupt. We do have there are cases where it is necessary to intervene, to interrupt. Use those judiciously. Many times, the reason we're using these tools is because we've not been able to create the environment where the team self-management naturally works itself out. And that could be, many times that's a structural. This suggests the intractable kinds of problems that aren't typically solved in a CSM class, or come back to the design, the things that large-scale Scrum focuses on. Which we'll call those the organizational design. So those things would be the structure and the policies of the organization, which is where I try to focus more nowadays. I want to find my mute button here. There we go. I found it. Yeah. Anything in particular I should emphasize before we open this up? Product backlog of manageable size, and by that, I didn't. Maybe I should have written this explicitly. To me, that's somewhere around 100 items. I'll suggest if you have more than 100 items in your product backlog, even if this is a large, even if you have 8 teams pulling from this, you've exceeded the product owner's ability to really prioritize effectively. Something's gone wrong. What should you do? Well, you consider archiving the whole thing and starting over. Possibly you have a bunch of tasks there. Hopefully you know how to distinguish by now the what and the why from the how. And if a lot of your product backlog items are about the how instead of the what, then and the why, then something's broken somewhere. I'll look more closely at that. Mention the release burn down chart. Has everyone seen that? The one I put one in the Scrum Master checklist that was useful in our case. Now, in most cases, I would steer people away from metrics. What's the problem with metrics is that they lead to local optimization. The things that are easy to measure are usually short-term type of things or near type of things. And the organization is already typically obsessed, addicted to these things, And the things that are more important, like will our code be maintainable 9 months from now? That's very hard to measure. Or are we adding features that are going to make the product less usable in the long run? Like Apple seems to be doing nowadays. These things are harder to measure. We can measure the number of features added, but it's the things that are more important, the impact type of things, are hard to measure. So I don't really encourage a lot of metrics, but maybe it's useful to know about Mike Cohn's innovation of the converging release burn down chart that's mentioned here. Usually it's the real purpose of this, though, is to help the product owner understand the importance of controlling or managing the scope. Every time we add something to the release expectation, let's assume a fixed date release, we're displacing something else. And we kind of know that mentally, but our job is to help the product owner visualize that. So maybe in the first 3 sprints, we would be drawing for the product owner a release burn down chart. But that we shouldn't be doing that, at 3 months later. Everyone should know how to do their own job at some point. If we're doing this, at least the way that I think Ken Schwaber had in mind. What else? Flow. This came from this great book. I don't know, this Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I can't pronounce this name. I noticed this. Oh, I did want to say this. As the Scrum Master, so the state of flow, and you know what it's like. You know what the state of flow is. Programmers know what the state of flow is anyway. Where you get into artists know what I'm talking about. Where you just lose track of time, where the work absorbs you, and it doesn't require a great deal of, I'll say, the prefrontal lobe, the strip executive function. It doesn't require a lot of energy to keep yourself in this state because the work is naturally absorbing, and it actually takes energy to interrupt it. So that's the flow state. Now, creating group flow. I think I mentioned the Group Genius book, did I? Oh, it's not. Is it listed here? A book by called Group Genius. I forgot the psychologist's name who wrote it. Recommended reading for Scrum Masters. Maybe we should send out a follow-up list, since all of you are obviously engaged enough in this to want to know stuff like that. So some of the ideas, came from having read that and then seeing what a team in the state of flow looks like versus an individual in the state of flow, and how that's a different thing. But as a Scrum Master, unfortunately, at least I don't get to be in that flow state in a typical organization anyway. My job, my role kind of requires me to be on the lookout for the things that might be to remove the things that would distract the team, but they sometimes will cause me to be a lightning rod in the organization. trying to create this environment means that I got to pay attention to some of the use my peripheral vision and pay attention to the things that I'm hoping that the teams don't have to worry about. And I suppose that's one of the reasons that maybe some of you have similar observations, but my experience with some of the really good Scrum Masters is that we don't get them for long enough. Once someone observes what a difference they've been able to make in a particular setting, they get moved or promoted, or they become coaches, and so we constantly have to be. I'm curious what your experience has been, but something I noticed a long time ago is that the people who are really good at doing this, unfortunately, when I check back a year later, it says, "Oh yeah, that person was great, and now she's doing this somewhere else," and it's unfortunate. But we constantly have to be on the lookout for people who are want to do this. Some of it seems to be innate. Like there are some people that just kind of naturally have this combination of the peripheral vision and the social perceptivity, and they're wise enough to know that it's not easy, but they're also naive enough to still believe that there's hope. Those are often the best candidates for this role that we're talking about. I guess as long as I'm rambling a bit, I'll tell one other case. Does it have to be the Scrum Master doing these things? Can we rotate these responsibilities? So the idea is, yeah, the team. This was in another book recommendation called the Skilled Facilitator by Roger Schwarz. In the Skilled Facilitator, Roger Schwarz points out that we want to develop the teams within the team the ability to facilitate themselves. So more and more, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. Believe me, there's still plenty of other stuff to do, to fix in the organization. I have never been to a place that didn't need a full-time BS eliminator. So there's plenty of, so to get over the fear of working yourself out of a job. There's something else to do. We want to help people learn. Oh, what was my point? We do want to develop the team's ability to facilitate for itself. And this was something, a particular technique I learned from Jerry Weinberg's class was to have some kind of marker, some indicator of who is facilitating at the moment. And Roger Schwarz observed that for the facilitator to have any credibility with the team, with the group, they must be substantively neutral. And everyone must recognize that they're neutral. And if you're neutral, you have a natural authority. No one has to, you don't have management power. But you have a natural authority that people automatically recognize. You don't have to be, in fact, power is not the most, powerful, is not the strongest kind of influence in the first place. But you have that natural authority, and that is lost as soon as you have an interest in a discussion. So there's a discussion. Should we use tabs or spaces in our? And you're like me. You hate tabs in source files. I just lost half you. You haven't. Then that's the point where, as a facilitator, I need to put down whatever we're using. In the Jerry Weinberg's class, we used a marker for that, but it could be anything. Actually, I don't recommend a marker because I want everyone there to have their own markers so anyone can write on the whiteboard. So whatever tool you're using, there's a conch, you put that down and say, okay, I'm not the facilitator because I'm not neutral in this. Let someone else pick that up and take it over. I did in Japan. Though I experienced the self-managing team firsthand at a tiny organization. In Japan, I visited an organization which, at least at that time, this was 2019, uh, had no management role whatsoever. About 160 people, which is not a large organization, but it's bigger than a startup with bigger than our small company with 12 people. And and at that time, it was working great, very powerful. Uh, I guess a lot of this depends on this being selective about hiring practices in the first place, because you can see how one person could mess this up. And believe it or not, there are people with that dark tetrad of behaviors, and they are in most organizations of any scale. But at least at this scale of about 160 people, 3 floors of a building in Tokyo, they weren't having that problem, and the organization was built out of self-managing teams. There was no manager role at all. There was a product owner, the CEO, and there were also scrum masters who are working when the team wants them. When the team wants them, they're there. When the people want them to be there, but they're not managing in any active way. And so we know it's humanly possible. Is it sustainable? I've heard stories about this being scaled to larger sizes. I'm always skeptical of these stories. So like way back when we heard the story, I remember being at a conference like in 2007 or something, and someone from Salesforce talked about how they converted their whole organization to Scrum Agile, and some of you know people in Salesforce, and that it's not. It's very much a superficial change. So don't be fooled by that, right? There's always, we can make a lot of superficial changes, the great renaming, without having fundamentally changed the organizational design, the policies, and the structure of the organization. Um, Maybe I should stop talking, and I'm curious. Get kind of lonely just talking. So, any
Em- em-
anything I should talk about? I see Joel. Go for it.
yep.
Thank you, Michael. I wonder if you have any, I don't know, survival tips or just tips in general for trying to do what you're talking about in an organization that doesn't quite embrace that sort of thing yet, but might be impressed by the right outcomes. I've worked in too many organizations that didn't appreciate the actively doing nothing Scrum Master. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I've helped coach teams that got so good that the teams took off and got recognized as really great teams. And I feel like I didn't do enough to sort of toot my horn and say, I helped them get there. And so I've actually feel like I've lost jobs not striking the right balance in the organization to say, I'm actively doing nothing, and that's what's the best thing for this team. Anything that you could do to help uh, be
Yeah.
successful.
Oh, well, you're talking to an unemployed guy, so you probably have more about this than me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have uh, it's a legit concern, and I don't think I have anything that wouldn't have occurred to you already for that. Yeah, I am sorry. I guess because when I got older, I kind of got to the point where I don't really want to do work that's not making a difference. And so for myself, and this is not the right answer for everyone, but for myself, I'm trying to focus on places where I have the top down and the bottom up engagement in that. And the time that I feel I made the time I was most happy with, actually, there's a couple of times. One was actually in state government, believe it or not. So I believe it's even possible there once, more, almost 20 years ago. But the other time was where it was a senior vice president who had engaged me, and he already knew that we were embarking on a difficult path, and he knew that optimizing for the big picture would be making things look worse from a local optimization perspective. And this would, and it was only because of his backing that I made a difference in the long run, which I'm still happy about. So sorry, Joel, I don't
I
have
was looking for
anything
one of
that
those magic bullets, but your, your gun is always empty of those.
yeah, I mean, maybe a different question. Useful. I'll turn the question around to how can we engage uh, at the level that's actually needed to make these differences? So how can we get our C levels and our VPs and our directors engaged in these changes?
Yeah.
I think that's the problem we should all be looking at.
By the way, Joel, thanks for the question. MJ, there was one present question that was pinged to me and personally and privately and in the chat
Sure.
about, I think it's coming from Deanna. If she's on the call, she may just voice it. Deanna, are you there?
Actually, I was just repeating somebody else's question, but it was about the checklist items. There's
Sure.
some that checklist items over which we have no control. For example, like all of part 4.
Yeah, that's similar to Joel's question, I think, or at least it has to do with I also want to call it a macro economic problem. The idea that the Scrum is something the teams do, and uh, our inability. So far, I'm going to suggest most of us have not been very successful in getting upper management involved in these, what we used to call transformations, involved in these agile adoptions. And I don't know how to. Well, we can take a look. We can go through them individually. Is the appropriate amount of inter-team communication happening? So things we can do. There's a set. There are patterns we can teach. These are on the left side. If you look at there's multiple inter-team communication patterns I blogged about, as well as alternatives to, if you look, alternatives to Scrum of Scrums. So if the teams start doing these things, then we can perhaps, in some cases, this might create the political capital you need to help people recognize that that it should be a team responsibility. We propose working features. So this is really about, do we have component teams or feature teams? Do we have teams that are just working the back end? And we have a front end team, a back end team, an iOS team, Android. That probably we have component teams, and that's unfortunately what it seems the intuitively obvious way to do it, and which doesn't lead to any team being able to actually do Scrum, because no team can develop a complete shippable vertical slice of product. And yeah, this we can increase. We can shift the responsibilities. We can increase by increasing the communication between teams, we can help try to make empathy a more powerful force than the structural things which are encouraging teams not to collaborate. But I still like to focus. To me, it's still trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I still, I'm sorry if this disappoints you. I still like to start with a structural change, as much of a structural change as I can make. So I feel you. These things you're not able to control. I'm going to suggest a way of using this that has been useful. Maybe you don't have complete control, but you've got something. One way to use this is in a retrospective. So give this to the developers. By the way, I'm going to mention my e-learning. It's free, but see me trying to multitask. Sprint retrospective. So at the Scrum training series e-learning, the one I'm most proud of and the one I had the most help with from Esther Derby, Daniel Larson, and others was this sprint retrospective e-learning module at the Scrum training series. If you haven't seen this, please do. Get a whole bunch of more tools for Scrum Masters to help you deal with these kinds of problems. Now we can also do an overall retrospective. If we're doing large-scale Scrum, we're required to do an overall retrospective, which is multiple teams. And this could be a place, something I have done, and maybe this will buy you the, I don't want to give advice that gets you fired, but you could use the overall retrospective, have people fill out for themselves organizational impediment forms and put them on the wall. I like to create 3 categories: things that we can directly control, people in the room can control, things that cannot ever change, it's just physically impossible due to Planck's constant or whatever, things that can't change. And then in the middle are the things that we don't directly control, but we have influence over, or we could have influence over if we were to be bolder, if we were to be more courageous about talking to people who can affect those things. I'm very interested in this middle category. When you have, let's say, 25 people or 50 people, and they put this on the wall, and they can upvote the ones they think are important, they can put them in the categories, and then you can get an hour of senior management's time there, and see that 25 people in the organization think that XYZ thing should change. For example, we should stop using Jira would be a good one. Then, even making a small change soon is more encouraging than a big change promised in the future. So there might be that might help some of you that are in this gray zone where you can't control these things, but possibly you can increase your influence over them. And I'll also recommend the book about influence by Robert Cialdini, and the book is called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. Hopefully someone's keeping track of all these books. All right, sorry, I know there's more questions. Can we, that's just, what other, I see a hand up. Marcos Ferreira?
Yes, hello. I was just it's based on the question Joel posed. I have the same problem solution that I was surprised I validated it works. What I do uh, when I take a new team, the first thing I do is I look at this state, how they are, and I make a report and I send it to the leadership who put me in place. Then as we progress and they improve, as you keep working with them, we use a lot of the Jira products, so Atlassian products. So Jira and Confluence, I leverage that to help. The boards are available for them to see, but leadership never go there. They love their PowerPoints and spreadsheets. So what I do is a very simple, I take screenshots every Friday, like today. I prepare a list of what they, just a quick summary of what they have been tasked to do and what they have accomplished for that week. Then during the daily stand-up, everything they say that I notice, this is a little over beyond what they should have done. I take notice of that and I include that on the Friday notice to the leadership saying, hey, these are extra accomplishments these guys did. So in every quarter, I use a blog in Confluence to see, and this is what they have achieved from what you requested for the quarter. I did not expect them to look at it, but lo and behold, they look at it, use it, and take up to their own leadership. So I'm still employed, so it is working. So yeah, and 2 people who left the team, other companies, on the farewell, they thanked me for helping the team to bring a process in place because they felt very chaotic before I started to help them. I did not know that. I didn't notice that. I'm just doing what I always do. But to them was important. So there you go. I would say toot your horn, yeah. Discrete, short reports, remind them every week. that you are there, and what the team is accomplishing, it reflects on you. So my suggestion, it's been working.
We just want to make sure these are more questions than experience sharing, just to make sure, because so many people that may wish to share their experience. MJ, answer to Marcus if you feel
Oh
there's
no,
a.
I have. Uh, no. Thanks for spreading that idea.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for sharing, Marcus.
Yeah.
We're gonna take one more question because we're almost out of time, folks. Dave, you have your hand raised. Is that question you would like to ask?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to have experience in the C-suite, providing strategy and things like that. But even if you don't, right? So there are things like community of practice meetings. Hopefully, you may have an agile coach. So I've always just volunteered this type of direction to either the agile coaches or the RTE or anything having to do with the organization, or let's say program directors, or let's say you're a bunch of scrum masters within a scrum master chapter. So you may have a manager. A lot of times as a scrum master, you have to talk about your metrics for your team. And I've had to deal with my hiring manager, that manager's manager, and then that manager's manager. And so you bring these things up in the meetings, and usually they like these type of ideas to bring everything into alignment. And also it's part of your job. If you look at the 2020 Scrum Guide, it talks about being an agile coach. So it's very easy to do these things, whether you're a large organization or a small organization. It really isn't out of scope. It's actually part of your scope to at least suggest these
Oh yeah.
things. So anyway, that's my answer, and it's always been successful for me. And even though it is sort of out of your scope, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get your way, but at least you could throw it out there. And if you truly are a successful Scrum Master, the more successful you are with your team, the more they're going to listen to you. And that comes out of those metrics.
Great.
Dave,
Yeah.
question you wanted to ask?
Can I add something to that, real quick? It is explicitly, yeah, it listed as a job responsibility. So having that there could help with understanding this is your job to do this. I'm going to add that in large scale Scrum, it's also an explicit responsibility of management to be in the overall retrospectives. So if you're doing you've got 8 teams working on a product, they do their individual team retrospectives privately, but then the overall retrospective is to discuss the systemic issues in the organization, and management is required in that. So this can be, so it's not just coming from you; it's coming from all the people that are doing the work.
Yeah, the overall retrospectives, I found you have to be very careful in there, because your retrospectives are supposed to be, your team retrospectives are supposed to be just unto your team. So if
Yeah.
you're going to release that type of information, you want to make sure it's anonymous. You don't want to do any finger pointing. And in those overalls, I can tell you, you can get in a lot of trouble in those things. So you have to be very careful and think before you speak in those type of retrospective, especially when you have PMs in there.
Suggest a tool that, yeah, so I don't know everyone's context. A tool that might help in those would be some of the open space techniques. So if there are groups, like 3 teams want to talk about something that affects them, and it's not safe to discuss beyond that, then that would be an opportunity for those 3 teams maybe. But yeah, I'm not gonna. I want to avoid giving prescriptions for how to manage the politics in anyone's own organization, because I think that all of you know your organizations better than I do.
MJ, and by the way, thank you everyone for the questions. MJ, we're gonna probably wrap this up just to make sure I'm respectful of your time, and I know people are gonna start dropping.
Yeah.
We have to go on right with the day. I want to personally thank you very much. Very personally to make the time and come out and do it for us. It was I know you're a very humble man and you speak in a very humble way, but the value you have produced years and years back and up until now, it's immense. So thank you for that. Hopefully it was worth for everyone. I try to record this, so there should be a link available for later use for you to use later. Any questions for MJ, please look him up. He's fully transparent on LinkedIn, or if you don't know how to get a hold of me, I'll get you in touch.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
MJ, once
Thanks,
again,
Gene.
and it's been a great pleasure. We'll talk again very soon. I've got a bunch of things we need to talk about. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, folks, everyone.
Thank you, MJ.
Enjoy the
Thank you, Errol.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.